before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walk, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day. Jacob the shepherd saw himself as the sheep and God as his shepherd. And that's how he phrased it. That's the prism through which he saw his relationship with God. And that becomes a very popular description of the relationship between God and man throughout the Old Testament. Most famously, David's statement in Psalm chapter 23 at verse 1, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." A few chapters later, he says something similar. Psalm chapter 28 at verse 9. Psalm chapter 28 at verse 9, this time David pleading with God, saying to the Lord, "Lord, save your people and be their shepherd." Later in the book of Psalms, a different psalmist this time, but in Psalm chapter 80 at verse 1, it became so prevalent to think of God's relationship with mankind in these terms. The psalmist there, in introducing the psalm, just refers to God this way, just says, "God, you are the shepherd of Israel." That's how they saw themselves relative to the Lord. God accepted the analogy. He even sometimes would use it to describe the relationship between leaders and those that they were to lead. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 2, 2 Samuel chapter 5 at verse 2, when God selected David to be the new king of Israel and told him about the leadership that he would have to undertake in that role, God turned to David and said, "You, David, you will shepherd my people." And so it's the relationship between God and man. It's the relationship between God's people's leaders and the people themselves. Even into the New Testament, the analogy holds. The apostles, in writing by inspiration, at least on a couple of occasions, talk about church leaders and their relationship to the church using these terms. In Acts chapter 20, at verse 28, Paul's statement to the elders in Ephesus and talking about them as shepherding the flock of which they were chosen to lead. 1 Peter chapter 5, at verse 2, similarly, Peter uses that phrase.